The wind hit the chapel door so hard you'd think the devil himself was trying to get out. Inside, it was all flickering candles and long shadows. Zaltana stood on the cracked tile floor, her feet bare, clutching her youngest baby to her chest. Her other 5 kids were hiding in the folds of her skirt, their little faces pale with a fear that was way too old for them. The whole village was there, packed in tight, watching her like a pack of starving wolves. They whispered about God, but all Zaltana could smell was blood. "God has spoken!" That was Father Hario. His voice boomed through the tiny chapel, and his black robes whipped around him in a breeze, coming through a broken stained glass window. "She brings ruin with every breath," he shouted, pointing a bony finger at her. "Our crops rot in the fields. Our livestock dies in the night. Our children are born touched." He spat that last word out like it was poison. Zaltana didn't cry. She'd used up all her tears 3 years ago, the night she held her husband in her arms and felt his life burn away in a fever she couldn't break. After that, you learn to keep your face still. You learn to wear silence like armor. "A widow with no man," hissed a woman from the front pew. It was Doña Veronica, the mayor's wife, her face pinched and sour. "And yet she stays. That's not piety. That's pride. And pride, Father, is the devil's tongue." Heads nodded all around. Some folks looked uneasy, but most of them looked hungry for a sacrifice. Her youngest, Tonadio, only 2 years old, whimpered in her arms. She rocked him gently, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. She didn't even flinch when a clump of dry dirt hit the floor by her feet, thrown from the back. "I've done nothing wrong," Zaltana said. Her voice was low, but it didn't shake. "My children are innocent." Father Hario's eyes were like chips of cold stone. "Children pay for the sins of their mothers, and no righteous woman becomes a widow so young unless heaven itself wants a reckoning." Behind him, the wind found the altar candles, and they hissed like snakes. She knew this wasn't about God. It was never about God. Earlier that same day, Don Romero, the richest landowner in the whole valley, had sent for her. She'd walked all the way to his grand hacienda with a tiny, stupid flicker of hope in her chest. Maybe he'd offer work. Maybe he'd show some mercy. His offer wasn't mercy. He told her she could work in his kitchens, yes, but he made it very clear what else would be expected of her after dark. When she refused, his smile curdled. "Don't be a fool, Zaltana," he'd sneered. "You and your 6 hungry mouths. What man will ever take that burden? What world do you think will just let you survive?" Her answer had been quiet, but it had been final. "I'd rather die than sell my children's dignity for a piece of bread." And now, here she was. Her crime wasn't witchcraft. Her crime was saying no. Her crime was refusing to disappear. "You have until sunrise," Father Hario boomed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Leave El Venardo. If you are still here when the sun comes up, we will call the authorities. And God help your children then, because no man here will." The big chapel doors groaned open, and the wind screamed into the room. No one moved to help her. No one moved to stop her. As she walked her children out into the night, some of the villagers crossed themselves. Others just looked away. The bells in the church tower began to ring as she stepped outside. They were louder than God. The thought came to her not with anger, but with the cold, quiet calm of a person who had finally stopped waiting to be rescued. The street was empty, dust and silence. Zaltana gathered her children close and started the long walk back to the crumbling adobe shack they called home. The kids didn't say a word. Even the oldest, Itel, who was 10, knew better than to ask questions. They had all learned that silence was safer than the truth. Inside, the single room smelled of wood smoke and fear. They had 1 candle left. Zaltana lit it and watched the tiny flame dance, trying to borrow some of its warmth, some of its fight. "We have to leave," she said softly. Where will we go, Mama? It was Chitlali, her eyes huge in her small face. Somewhere they don't know our names. What if they follow us? Whispered Sidel, who was only 6. They won't, Zaltana said, her voice harder than she felt. They think we'll be dead before the week is out. They think the desert will finish the job for them. They didn't have much to pack. A couple bags of worn-out clothes, half a wool blanket, a dented copper pot, and a little tin box with their savings. 12 pesos. That was it. Zaltana carefully wrapped her wooden wedding crucifix, the small knife her husband had carved for her, and the birth records for each of her children. Then she gathered them in a circle on the dirt floor, the candlelight making their shadows jump and twist on the walls. Listen to me, she said, looking into each of their faces. Whatever happens out there, we stay together. If you're scared, you tell me. If you're tired, you tell me. We are not a curse. We are not broken. We are a family. We walk as one. Etel, her oldest, crawled closer. Her eyes had a look in them that was far too knowing for a child. We'll find a new place, right, Mama? A place with no priests. Zaltana kissed her forehead. We'll find a place where the only voice that matters is the wind. Nobody slept that night. When the last of the candles sputtered and died, melting into a sad little pool of wax, Zaltana knew it was time. She wrapped Tonatio to her chest in a sling, gently woke the others, and pulled open the door. The sky was still black, but a thin line of orange was bleeding along the edge of the horizon. They walked east, away from the sleeping village, toward the mountains that lay beyond the great salt flat. They were walking off the map. The danger was real, she knew that, but staying was a guaranteed death. As the first rays of sun touched the desert floor, not a single one of them looked back. But someone was looking at them. Far behind them, hidden in the dark hills overlooking the village, a man sat on a black horse. His face was all sun and sorrow, his eyes as deep and cracked as the dry earth. He'd been in the back of the church. He'd watched the whole sick spectacle. He'd seen the priest's lies, and he'd seen the mother who refused to break. Tenok, the man they called the Ghost of the Red Valley, tightened his grip on the reins. He'd been planning on riding west, disappearing again. But now something was stirring inside him. A feeling he thought he had buried years ago, right alongside his own family. Not everyone who walks into the desert is meant to die there. He nudged his horse forward, following the small, lonely figures as they were swallowed by the vast, empty land. The sand was still cold from the night when they left the last man-made path behind. Zaltana walked in front, Tonatio nestled against her chest, wrapped in the same shawl she'd used for all her babies. Her 2 oldest girls, Itel and Chitlali, held on to the edges of her skirt like little anchors. The twins, Isel and Zoe, trudged behind, and 5-year-old T-Pan just stared at the endless, empty world with wide, silent eyes. Behind them, the village of El Venardo shrank until it was nothing more than a bad memory. Ahead, there was no road, just the thorny scrub and the great empty breath of the Sonoran desert. Twisted mesquite trees clawed at the sky. Buzzards circled high above. Cacti stood like silent green soldiers guarding a kingdom of death. Zaltana had a direction, east, but she had no destination. She'd heard travelers talk of a trade road, somewhere out past the plains. If they could just reach it, maybe she could find work. Mending clothes, cooking for traders, anything. Maybe someone would let her children sleep in a barn, maybe. They had half a canteen of water and a few dry tortillas. That was all. By noon, the sand wasn't cold anymore. It was a skillet. Etel's thin sandals fell apart, the leather cracking in the heat. Without a word, Zaltana tore a strip from her own shawl and wrapped her daughter's feet. Tonatio started to cry, a weak, thirsty sound. His lips were cracked and his little body was hot to the touch. The twins started to lag, their feet dragging, their voices small as they begged for water she didn't have. "I feel dizzy, Mama," Sitlali whispered, and she was the one who never complained. Zaltana just kept walking. She couldn't stop. If she stopped, they would all feel it. The fear that was clawing at her throat, the truth that she was just as lost as they were. Her legs ached. Her mouth felt like it was full of dust. They found a little bit of shade under a rock ledge in the afternoon. She gave them the last of the tortillas, one tiny piece each. Even the baby chewed on his like it was a feast. "We should have seen the road by now," she muttered, not meaning for anyone to hear. Etel looked up, her face flushed red from the sun. "Are we lost, Mama?" Zaltana couldn't lie. Not about this. "I don't know," she said. Then she added the only lie she had left. "But we'll keep going. It has to be close." Her hands were shaking as she tried to brush the sand from her skirt. The words just fell out of her mouth. Sometimes the worst path looks like the only one. When the sun was low enough to breathe again, they moved on. But Tonatio had stopped crying. Now he was just making small, whimpering sounds. Zaltana held him tight, whispering old lullabies her grandmother used to sing, songs that smelled like corn and beans and a life that was gone forever. The land was changing. The ground grew harder, rockier. The few thorny shrubs disappeared. There was no shade anywhere. And worse, there were no signs of life, no tracks, no trash, no bones. A place this empty wasn't just wild, it was avoided. That night, they huddled together under a small rock outcropping. The stars were brilliant and cold and silent. They didn't offer any comfort at all. Zaltana gave each child a few precious sips of water. She took none for herself. She held Tonatio all night, feeling his tiny heartbeat flutter against her chest like a moth trapped in a jar. She tried to pray, not to the God from the church, but to the stars, to the dust, to anything that might be listening. "Don't let them die," she whispered into the darkness. "Take me. Just let them live." By morning, T-Pan couldn't stand up. She just groaned and slumped back to the ground when Zaltana tried to lift her. Her skin was burning hot. "She's just tired," Zaltana said quickly, her voice tight. "She'll be fine once we get moving." But her mind was screaming the truth. She had misjudged everything. The distance, the heat, the water. They weren't on a path to a road. They were in the deep desert, walking straight into their own graves. She picked up T-Pan, balancing her on one hip, and motioned for the others to follow. Tonatio cried from the sling on her back. The sun rose again, not like a promise, but like a punishment. The twins were crying now, but no tears came out. Chitlali just kept begging for shade that wasn't there. Then Itzel, her brave, strong Itzel, stopped walking. She looked up at her mother, her eyes glassy. "Mama," she whispered, "we're going to die out here, aren't we?" Zaltana opened her mouth to answer, to lie, to say anything at all. But no sound came out. And that's when she saw him, a figure on the ridge up ahead, motionless, watching. At first she thought it was the heat playing tricks on her eyes, a mirage, a ghost cooked up by her own guilt. But she blinked, and he was still there, sharper now, a man on a black horse, with long dark hair and a rifle strapped to his back. Every instinct screamed at her to run. The stories she'd heard as a child, tales of Apache raiders who stole children in the night, they all came rushing back. But this man wasn't charging. He wasn't even holding his rifle. He was just watching. And then she realized. She'd seen him before. The night they left the village, she'd felt eyes on her back. From up in the hills. It was him. She froze. Her children huddled behind her, their fear a living thing she could feel on her skin. The man guided his horse down from the ridge. Not at a run, but at a slow, deliberate walk. His hands were open at his sides. He stopped about 20 feet away, swung himself off the horse, and let the reins hang loose. "I saw you yesterday," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "I watched what they did in that church." Zaltana pushed her children further behind her. Her legs were shaking so hard she thought she might fall. "We have nothing," she said, her voice cracking. "We just want to live." The man nodded. "I know," he said, "and you won't. Not if you keep walking this way." She just stared at him. "There's no water for days in that direction," he continued, his eyes scanning the horizon. "That path you're on, it leads straight to the cliffs of the dead. You'll all be gone by sundown." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. "You have children," he said, his gaze softening just a little as he looked at the small faces peeking out from behind her. "That makes this not your fault, but it does make it your fight." Tonatiuh whimpered against her neck, a tiny, miserable sound. "Why are you here?" she finally managed to ask. He was quiet for a long moment. He looked down at the cracked earth, then back at her. "Because I know this desert," he said, "and I've buried enough people in it." He pointed east, but at a different angle than she'd been walking. "There's a spring over there. Shade, shelter. It's half a day's ride. I can take you." "Why would you help us?" The question was sharp. She'd learned the hard way that no one did anything for free. He hesitated, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something ancient and sad in his eyes. "Even ghosts need something to believe in," he said. She looked at her children, at their sunburnt faces and hollow eyes, at T-Pan, who was barely conscious in her arms. Maybe this man was a liar. Maybe he was a killer, worse than anyone back in El Venardo. But the path she was on was already killing them. There was no other choice to make. She gave a single, sharp nod. Lead. The desert under Tenok's guidance was a different world. He didn't walk in a straight line toward the sun. He moved in a strange zigzag pattern, leading them through dry riverbeds she hadn't even seen, behind jagged rock formations that cut the wind, and under the sparse shade of thorny mesquite. Where Zaltana had seen an ocean of death, this man saw a map of survival. He didn't talk much, but every move he made had a purpose. By midday, he led them to a spot shadowed by a deep rock overhang. "Rest here," he said, dismounting. "The next stretch is harder." Zaltana hesitated. Her body was screaming for rest, but her mind was screaming with suspicion. "You lead us into nowhere," she said, her voice flat. "You say there's a spring. I have no proof." Tenok met her gaze without blinking. "I don't expect your faith," he said, "but I've buried enough people who waited for proof." He untied a leather pouch from his saddle and tossed it on the ground in front of her. It wasn't much, but it was everything: dried meat and a small skin of water. Without a word, she knelt and gave it all to the children. Her oldest, Etel, watched Tenok the whole time, not with fear, but with a strange kind of wonder. He was like one of the warriors from the old stories her father used to tell, the kind who lived in the wilderness and only appeared when they were needed most. After they ate, the children collapsed in the shade, huddling together. Tonatiuh curled up against Zaltana's side. His fever seemed to have broken. He was just quiet now, his little chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Zaltana watched Tenok. He sat on a nearby stone, sharpening a long, curved blade. The sound was quiet, steady, and somehow calming. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." He didn't look up. She waited for more, but he offered nothing. "You knew we were leaving that night." "I did." "You followed us." He nodded. "Why?" The scraping of the blade stopped. He looked over at her, his eyes unreadable. "Even ghosts need something to believe in." The words just hung there in the dry air. He wiped the blade clean and slid it back into its sheath. I've been wandering for 2 years, he said suddenly. My name, Tenoch. It means stone underwater. But even stones can break. He stood up and pointed east. There's a canyon ahead. Beyond it, a place where the soil is blue. That's where the spring is. We can make it before dark. You keep saying we, Zoltana said quietly. This isn't your fight. Tenoch looked back at her, and his face, which had been a mask of hard lines, softened for just a second. I had a family once, he said, and that was all he said. But somehow it was enough. They set out again, but things were different now. Tenoch walked ahead, leading his horse, Obsidian Wind. The children, sensing the change, started asking him quiet questions. What's your horse's name? Chitlali asked. Obsidian Wind, he answered without turning. Because he runs silent. One of the twins whispered, Does he talk to you? Tenoch actually stopped walking. He turned, and a small, rare smile touched his lips. He listens, he said. Better than most men. The kids giggled, and Zoltana felt a knot in her own chest loosen just a little. As they entered the canyon, the rock walls rose up on either side of them, glowing gold in the afternoon sun. Tenoch moved slowly, his eyes everywhere, watching for snakes, for loose rocks, for anything. You said you had a family, Zoltana said, walking beside him now. He didn't look at her, but he answered. My wife was Ayana. My children, they were named for the stars. What happened to them? Soldiers, he said. The word was heavy, final. I was away, hunting. When I came back, he trailed off. He didn't need to finish. Zoltana knew that kind of silence. She knew that kind of grief. I buried them with my own hands, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. After that, I stopped speaking. I stopped being a man. Then what are you now? She asked. He finally looked at her. Maybe something in between. They reached a bend in the canyon. Tenoch suddenly raised a hand, stopping everyone. He dismounted, crouched down, and studied the dirt. Fresh tracks, he murmured. Zoltana's whole body went rigid. Coyotes? No, he said, standing up slowly. Bare feet, one set, small. The children froze behind her. She pulled them close, her eyes scanning the rocks above. And then a voice echoed down from the ridge. I wondered how long it would take you to find this place. Everyone looked up. Standing on a ledge about 20 feet above them was a girl. She was barefoot. Her hair was a wild mess, and her face was streaked with dirt. Zoltana's mouth fell open. It was Molina, a girl from her village. What are you doing here? Zoltana cried. I followed you, Molina said, scrambling down the rocks. After they told everyone what they did, I left. I had to warn you. Tenoch stepped forward, his hand resting on the handle of his blade. Warn us about what? You bring soldiers? No! Molina shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. But they're looking for you. Father Hario and Don Romero, they sent men north. They told everyone you ran off to join bandits. They're hunting you. And you? Zoltana asked, her mind reeling. Why would you risk this? Molina looked past her, at the 6 small children huddled together. Her expression softened. Because what they did was wrong, she said simply. And if I stayed silent, then I'm just part of the same curse they put on you. Tenoch looked from Zoltana to Molina, his face grim. We don't have long then. There's an elder nearby, Molina added quickly. He lives in these rocks. A blind man. He helped me find my way. He said he's been waiting. Zoltana stared at her. Waiting for me? Molina nodded. He said, the woman who walks with shadows will bring the light. They kept moving, the last of the daylight fading from the canyon walls. Up ahead, a small opening in the rock face waited, like the mouth of a sleeping giant. Tenoch stopped. He looked back at Zoltana, his eyes dark and serious. Names vanish, he said quietly, but stories echo in the bones of the earth. And then he turned and walked toward the cave. The air in the cave was cool and alive. It smelled of sage and old smoke. The floor was worn smooth, and the walls near the entrance were covered in carvings. Not fancy art, but deep, rough symbols. Storms, animals, and a strange figure of a mother with 6 arms. Zaltana entered slowly, her children clinging to her. Even Tenok seemed to be moving with caution. Only Molina walked forward as if she belonged there. At the back of the cave, almost lost in the shadows, a man sat on a flat rock. He was wrapped in so many layers of wool and hide he looked like part of the mountain. He was small, ancient, and perfectly still, but when Zaltana's foot scuffed the dirt floor, his head came up. His eyes were milky white. He was blind. "You brought her," he said. His voice sounded like rocks tumbling down a hill. "Finally." Zaltana swallowed. "You were expecting me?" "No," the old man said. "But the land was. It remembers things people try to forget." Tenok stepped forward. "Tata Kwutli." The old man's lips pulled back in a faint smile. "Still breathing, are you, ghost boy?" "I walk, don't I?" "Barely," the old man rasped. "Bring the mother closer." Zaltana hesitated. She'd been called a widow, a burden, a witch, but never the mother like it was a title of honor. She moved forward. The elder, Tata Kwutli, reached out a hand, his fingers thin and knotted. He didn't touch her. He just moved his hand through the air in front of her face, as if reading something she couldn't see. "You walk with 6 small storms," he said, "and one of them carries fire in his lungs." Zaltana tensed. "Tonatio, he's been sick." "He is not sick," Tata said. "He is changing. He was born under a moon that does not forget. His fever is not a punishment. It is a memory." She didn't understand a word of it, but she didn't argue. "There is a place," the old man continued, "a valley, hidden beyond the dead hills, protected by stone and sky. Yohuali Ehekatl, the valley of night and wind." Molina stepped forward. "I told them. That's where the spring is." "It is more than a spring, child," Tata said. "It is a wound in the earth that never healed. A place where the old gods stayed behind to mourn what was lost. If you can reach it, you will live, but it does not let just anyone pass." Tenok shifted beside her. "The path is dangerous. It is not meant for the weak," Tata agreed. Zaltana looked down at her children, at their tired, trusting faces. "And what makes you think I can lead them there?" The old man's blind eyes seemed to look right through her. A real smile touched his face this time. "Because you are already doing it," he said. "And because you carry the one thing they fear most." "What's that?" "A heart that refuses to kneel." Silence. Then, slowly, Tata pushed himself to his feet, using a staff carved with feathers and flames to steady himself. "Come," he said. "Let me show you." He led them deeper into the cave to a place lit by a small fire. The walls were covered in paintings, made with red and yellow clay. One showed a woman with hair like smoke, standing between 2 mountains, a child in one arm and a blade in the other. Another showed faceless soldiers devouring a village. But behind the soldiers, there was a black sun, and under it, 6 small figures stood around a fire. "Some call this prophecy," Tata whispered. "I call it an echo. The memory of those who fought and bled on this land before you." He pointed to an image of a great black horse running side by side with a jaguar. "That is you," he said to Tenok. Tenok just grunted. "I am no jaguar." "You are if she is the horse." A few of the children giggled, and Zaltana almost smiled. Tata turned back to her. "You must leave before the sun hits that peak tomorrow. The trail will split at a great ash-colored rock. Take the path that smells of sulfur. It means the earth there is still alive." "What if we fail?" Zaltana asked. You won't, he said simply. But if you doubt for even a moment, stay here. The desert has no mercy for those who walk without decision. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. When you reach the valley, you will be tempted to stop, to say, "This is enough." Do not. Why not? Because stillness, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, is just another kind of death. That night, they camped just outside the cave. Tenoch built a small fire. Molina made tea from herbs Tata had given them. The kids, for the first time in what felt like forever, seemed calm. Zaltana sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. You think he's mad? She asked Tenoch. Completely, he said, but he's the right kind of mad. Do you believe in this place, this valley? He looked out at the vast, dark desert. I believe there are places this world has forgotten, he said, and people it has tried to erase. He looked over at her. Maybe we are both. A coyote howled in the distance, a lonely, ancient sound. Zaltana looked at her sleeping children. For the first time since leaving El Venardo, the crushing weight on her shoulders lifted, just a little. It wasn't that the danger was gone. It was that she could finally see something beyond it. Before dawn, Tata was waiting for them at the edge of the ridge. You're not coming with us? She asked. He smiled his cracked, dry smile. I belong to the rocks now, but I will walk with you in spirit. He took her hand and pressed something cool and smooth into her palm. It was a stone, polished by time, with a thin crack running right through the middle of it. It's broken, she said. No, he whispered. It's complete. The break is how the light gets in. He stepped back. You will know you have reached the right place, when the silence no longer scares you. They set off as the sky began to turn from black to gray. The children walked with a new strength. Tonatio, wrapped against his mother's chest, was cooing softly. Molina and Tenoch walked in front, their eyes scanning every rock, every shadow. Zaltana walked behind them all, the stone still warm in her hand. As they reached the great ash-colored rock and saw the two paths diverge, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fear. It was something that felt dangerously close to hope. The path Tata had sent them on wasn't a path. It was a punishment. By noon, the trail was gone, swallowed by a landslide of jagged, broken rock. The mountain rose up in front of them, steep and cruel. The air grew thin, and every breath was like swallowing dust. Swarms of flies buzzed around their heads, drawn to their sweat. Tenoch led his horse as far as he could, then dismounted and walked beside it, his face set like stone. Molina stayed with the twins, helping them scramble over the rocks, telling them stories about fire spirits to keep their minds off their aching legs. Zaltana had Tonatio strapped to her back now. Her arms burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop. The kids had stopped asking when they would get there. They just kept climbing. At one point, Etel slipped, and her hand came down hard on a sharp piece of shale. Blood welled up instantly. Zaltana rushed to her side, tearing another strip from her dwindling skirt to wrap the wound. I'm okay, Mama, Etel whispered, her face pale. Keep going. Zaltana kissed her forehead. You are so brave. Etel tried to smile. Like you. Up ahead, Tenoch was scouting a narrow ledge that wrapped around the cliff face. Below them, the world fell away into a chasm so deep you couldn't see the bottom. We rest soon, he called back, but soon never came. Instead, a storm came. It rose up from the south, a wall of sand and wind. It hit them with a roar, throwing grit in their eyes, their mouths, their lungs. The wind howled like a demon. Tenoch shoved them all under a small rock overhang. Molina grabbed the twins, covering them with her body. Zaltana crouched over her other children, her back to the storm, feeling the sand whip against her like 1,000 tiny needles. They stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, huddled together against the mountain's rage. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The wind died. The silence was deafening. Slowly, they stood up, coughing, spitting out sand. Tenok looked down at the ledge they were about to cross. His face was grim. "The trail," he said. "It's gone. The storm took it." Molina stared at the empty space where the path used to be. "What do we do now?" "We climb." Zaltana stepped forward, her voice raw but steady. "Then we climb." The last stretch was a near-vertical wall of rock. It was the only way up. Tenok went first, finding handholds and footholds that seemed invisible. From the top, he lowered a rope. Molina went next, pulling the twins up with her. Then it was Zaltana's turn. She tied Tonatio to her back as tight as she could, kissed each of her remaining children on the ground, and started to climb. Her muscles trembled. Her fingers were raw. Halfway up, her foot slipped. A rock broke loose and tumbled into the abyss. She cried out, twisting to look down, just in time to see Etel step onto a loose patch of scree. The ground gave way. Etel screamed as she fell. Tenok moved like lightning. He dove across the edge of the cliff, his arm shooting out, and caught her by the wrist just as she went over. She dangled there, kicking, crying, a river of dirt and rock pouring down past her into the void. Tenok let out a guttural roar of effort, the veins in his arms bulging as he pulled her, inch by inch, back to safety. Zaltana scrambled the rest of the way up, her hands bleeding. She grabbed Etel, holding her so tight it hurt. "I almost fell," Etel sobbed into her mother's neck. "But you didn't," Zaltana whispered fiercely. "You didn't." Tenok leaned against a rock, breathing hard. There was a deep, jagged cut across his palm, where a rock had sliced him. "You're hurt," Zaltana said. "It'll close," he muttered. "You saved her." "She saved herself," he said. Then, quieter, he added, "If the mountain doesn't break you, it will name you." That night, the air was thin and cold. They huddled around a tiny fire Molina managed to start with some dry moss. The kids were a single sleeping pile under the blankets. Zaltana sat beside Tenok, carefully wrapping his wounded hand. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He glanced at her. "You say that like it was a choice. You owe us nothing." "I owe your daughter everything," he said. They sat in silence for a long time. Then he asked, his voice soft, "Why do you never cry?" Zaltana looked up at the sharp, cold stars. "I used to," she said, "when my husband died, when they blamed my children, when they left dead birds on my doorstep to call me a witch." She looked back at the fire, a bitter smile on her face. Now I'm saving it, for the day they're finally safe." Near midnight, a sound made Tenok jump to his feet, blade in hand, but it was only Tata Quoutley, standing at the edge of the firelight like he'd grown right out of the rock. "I told you to walk with courage," the old man said. "And you have?" Molina stared at him. "You followed us all this way?" "I never left," he said. He walked over to Zaltana and put a hand on her shoulder. His touch was surprisingly strong. "The valley is close, just beyond this ridge, but you are not the only ones moving in these mountains." Zaltana stiffened. "Who?" "Men from your village, soldiers. They don't think you ran away to die anymore. They think you carry rebellion in your arms." "Do I?" she asked. Tata Quoutley smiled. "You carry the one kind of defiance they cannot stomach. You carry survival." He turned to go, then paused. "Sleep now. Tomorrow the land will open for you." And then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Before the sun came up, Zaltana stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down into the darkness below. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. A change in the wind. A faint smell, not of dust, but of damp earth. Of life. Molina came and stood beside her. I didn't think we'd make it this far. We haven't made it yet, Zaltana said, but it's close. Behind them, the children began to stir. Tenok saddled his horse. The first crack of orange light split the horizon. Together, they began to walk down into the unknown. At first, the valley didn't look like a promised land. It just looked like a deep bowl of green and brown, a crack in the desert floor. But as they descended and the sun rose higher, the place revealed its secrets. There were trees, thick and shady. There were springs bubbling up cold and clear right from the rocks. And there were the ruins of an ancient village, stones covered in vines, a place that was still breathing. Zaltana stood at the edge of it all, with Tonatio sleeping in her arms. "Is this it?" she whispered. Tenok stood beside her, his face strangely peaceful. "Yohuali ehekatl," he said softly. Molina let out a long breath. "It doesn't look cursed." "That's the thing about blessings," Tenok said. "They only grow where curses have died." As they walked down onto the valley floor, the children suddenly came alive. They kicked off their worn-out sandals and splashed in a shallow pool, their laughter echoing off the cliffs. It was the first time Zaltana had heard them laugh in months. She didn't tell them to be quiet. She just let the sound wash over her. Tears pricked at her eyes, not tears of sadness or fear, just relief. The valley was bigger than it looked. There were pockets of wild gardens, groves of fruit-bearing cacti, and old stone houses, some of them still whole enough to provide shelter. Carvings covered the walls, birds, moons, and mothers with open hands. "This was a village once," Tenok said, running his hand over a weathered stone doorway. "Long before the mapmakers came." "Why did they leave?" Zaltana asked. He shrugged. "They didn't. The world just stopped looking for them. They chose a small, sturdy ruin near the main spring. It had 3 walls and a huge ancient tree that served as a roof. Without being asked, everyone started working. Tenok cleared debris. Zaltana portioned out the last of their food. The children, even the little ones, gathered firewood. It was like they all knew, instinctively, that this was more than just a place to rest. It was a place to begin. "Give them a place to stand," Molina said, watching the kids work, "and they will build their own name." Zaltana looked at the young girl who had risked everything for them. "You lost your home because of us." Molina smiled, a real, bright smile. "No," she said. "I left a place that was broken. I followed something worth keeping." That night, for the first time in forever, they ate a hot meal. They had found wild onions near the spring, and Tenok had trapped a rabbit in the rocks above. They sat around a real fire under the brilliant desert stars, and it felt like home. Tenok sat a little apart from the group, his knife in his hand, his eyes scanning the darkness at the edge of the valley. Zaltana went and sat beside him. "You still think someone's following us?" "I never stopped thinking that," he said, not looking at her. "Especially here." "You think this is too good to be true?" He shook his head. "No, I think it's exactly good enough for someone to want to take it from us. You only own what you are willing to defend." His words hit her hard. She thought of El Venardo, of Don Romero's ugly proposition, of Father Hario's lies. She thought of all the years she had swallowed her anger and stayed silent. Maybe Tenok was right. Maybe peace wasn't something you were given. Maybe it was something you built, and then dared the world to try and tear down. The next few days were a blur of work. Zaltana and Molina patched the roof of their new home with clay and palm fronds. The children explored every inch of the valley, learning the trails, naming the trees. Tenok hunted, always returning with food. They were no longer just surviving. They were thriving. One morning, Etel came to her with a necklace she had made from seeds and vine. "This is for when you go to the council," she said seriously. What council? Zoltana asked, smiling. The one we're going to make, Itel said. You found this place. That makes you the Heffa, the chief. I'm your mother, Itel. You're both.